Welcome to the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast. This Specialty Pharmacy Podcast is a collaboration with the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy, the NASP, and the Pharmacy Podcast Network. The mission of the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy is to improve specialty pharmacy practice by promoting continuing professional education and certification of specialty pharmacists, while advocating for public policies that ensure patient access to specialty medications. As the healthcare industry's leading podcast dedicated to the pharmacy profession, the Pharmacy Podcast Network is proud to bring our listeners the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast in partnership with the NASP.
Hi, this is Jim Smeeding, pharmacist, president of Indication Bio. Today we're going to talk about the medical marijuana space as we listen to the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast.
Hey there, Pharmacy Podcast Network listeners. This is the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast. I am thrilled today to invite back a very special man to the industry, someone who was on the Pharmacy Podcast on December 13th, 2013, Mr. Jim Smeeding. Welcome back to the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast. Jim, how are you?
I'm great, and it's great to be back and, as usual, talk about timely areas of concern and interest and opportunity in the pharmacy space and how specialty pharmacy, medical marijuana, and other areas in this milieu of opportunity all kind of come together.
We also have another participant in today's show, technologist, a thought leader in the space of pharmacy, investor, one of my dear friends in pharmacy, and sponsor of the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast, the CEO of KeyCentrix, Mr. Elie Khalife. How are you, Elie, today?
How are you, Todd? Hello, Jim. How are you? I know you're not new to the Pharmacy Podcast, and hopefully we'll get a lot of information to the listeners about specialty pharmacy, the ability of the pharmacist, the role of the pharmacist, educating the patient in multiple disease states on the use of medical marijuana as an alternative to the opioids, an issue that the U.S. is facing. And I'm sure that with your background, the research that you have been involved in, and the future of Indication Bio, you are going to contribute to replacing the opioids with medical marijuana. So thank you, Todd. Thank you, Jim. I'm sure that we're going to start with multiple questions. The ball is in your camp.
Yep. So let's start out with Jim. Jim, for our listeners' purposes who don't know you the way that Elie and I do and your background, just give us an overview of your background and being part of the great industry of pharmacy, but more specifically, specialty pharmacy.
Absolutely. And thanks for the opportunity, Todd and Elie, to, again, be on the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast today. So for those of you who don't know me, I am a pharmacist. I've been in the pharmaceutical business since 1973. So most people will tell you that I'm still pretty creative and that still developing different areas, but my focus has always been on pharmacy and how to raise the awareness and involvement of pharmacists as caregivers in this industry. So bit of a background, and I'll make it quick. I started in the hospital pharmacy business, rose to prominence in the hospital business. I actually had my own home infusion therapy company back in the early days of the 90s, surveyed for the Joint Commission of Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations in the infusion therapy space, of which I would consider a predecessor to where specialty pharmacy has developed to. Along the way, got very interested in health economics. I'm a past president, founder of the International Society of Pharmacoeconomics and Outcomes Research. And through all of that, have been very much involved in organizations that support and put pharmacists as caregivers that are critical in terms of care delivery here in the United States as well as abroad. So by doing that, as I think some people may recognize me as the executive director of the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy, which is a labor of love that I did for 3 years, and the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy continues on, and I would like to think that at least to a certain extent that I've helped support their prominence as they move forward, representing specialty pharmacy amongst many stakeholders, payers, providers, obviously federal regulatory bodies, as well as obviously the patients that get the greatest benefit out of specialty pharmacy.
Okay, definitely, Jim, your participation with NASP, the creation of this association that brought together thought leaders in the market, and the efforts that they continue to do, for the better of the pharmacy business. Their selection of people to be on the board that drive the industry, that drive the education, the certification, and the lobbying with the government for the better of pharmacy. One of the areas that specialty pharmacy would benefit from is your involvement in medical marijuana and the background in medical marijuana that you have developed, your interest. Can you talk a little bit with us about this from the issues that the nation is facing, and your background, the studies that you have done about the subject?
Sure, Elie, that's great. I'd love to talk a little bit more about it. Back about 4 or 5 years ago, I think the specialty pharmacy space was already being challenged in regards to patients who were coming forward with various types of diseases that were looking for alternative therapies, other things that would help them cope, whether it be oncology, multiple sclerosis, pain management in general. And I think what we started to see in the specialty space is that many of these people that were seeking alternatives were starting to utilize medical marijuana. And I think we all know kind of at least the most recent history of medical marijuana and its approval for use in the United States. And I think we should talk a little bit about what the regulatory issues are and, again, how the vagaries of federal control have certainly slowed down the opportunities for patients, first of all, but then for medical professionals to participate in terms of the care of these patients that are using medical marijuana. So I think it's easy enough for anybody today to go online and take a look. There's 29 states, I believe, that have medical marijuana. There's, I guess, about 6 or 7 now that are full-blown recreational. And there's even more interesting is there's a ton of them that have decriminalized the use of marijuana in terms of lowering any kind of regulatory oversight and penalties associated for the use of medical marijuana. So I think, that's pretty significant, as well as I think if we look globally, we see more and more countries, Canada soon to join on a national basis. But in the U.S., I guess 70 years of lack of research in this area has stopped the federal government from participating more fully in terms of the decriminalization of marijuana, or at least the utilization of medical marijuana on a regulatory basis. So I think everybody still understands that from the federal standpoint, it's a C1 controlled substance, which puts it right in there with heroin and other agents that are clearly addictive as well as harmful. And we all know that's not the facts. That's not the truth in the medical marijuana space. And we can take a look at publications, even things that the federal government themselves authored in 2006 that show the promise of developing endocannabinoid-based medicines, which we would call marijuana or marijuana-based medicines. So, again, I think it's an interesting history, but what that federal scheduling has done, of course, is locked out medical professionals, pharmacists, physicians, nurses, and others from fully participating in the care of patients in this particular space. Today, in most states, physicians, when challenged by a patient about the use of medical marijuana, they will basically tell them, go on the internet, I don't think it's going to hurt you, things like that. So, trying to get past the regulatory issues has become really a challenge. It's not going away. Changes in terms of current administration from previous administration is probably lengthened out the opportunity, but more and more, I think, at the state level, we see patients as well as politicians who are recognizing the fact that this is offering relief and opportunity. So I think we are moving forward. And when you see Florida, Louisiana, places that, might be Arkansas, that might be traditionally a little bit more conservative, as opposed to if we take a look on the west coast of the U.S., where the majority of recreational use is been authorized. I think you see that indeed with 29 out of 50 states that things are starting to move, the tide is moving, and that we think that there's going to be more and more opportunities. So getting medical professionals prepared and understanding what these benefits are really becomes a major issue.
So Jim, when I hear of the wins and the benefits, and I'm reading research papers put out by very credible organizations that are bringing data to the forefront for physicians and pharmacists to understand the benefits of medical cannabis, medical marijuana, the very first thing I think about is children suffering with cancers or seizures or something to do that it alleviates based on the oils that's extracted, putting it in their oatmeal, ingestible, and not the quick to think when you're uneducated, lighting up a joint per se. So what I get excited about is, and frustrated too, both sides, is if this could be put in the hands of a pharmacist and physician team based on the disease state, with data backing it, how much of a benefit it would bring to those starting out with children first, and in the pain and the alleviation and the solutions that it can provide from a healthcare perspective as medicine. And that's like that key word for me and for politicians and for people. And what's your thoughts on that?
Well, Todd, it's clearly the medicalization of marijuana has continued to move forward to legitimize the actual utilization of these products or derivatives of these products. I've given presentations over the years about this to large crowds. I've got one presentation I called Weeding Out the Myths, where you really have to take a look at what we have to do within our current framework of the FDA to actually allow patients full access to products that are based on cannabis. So cannabis-based medicines, as I call it, it's a little different than medical marijuana, and I can talk a little bit more about it. But I think what we're seeing is that clearly the move forward through, and it's a much longer and more expensive process, but the move forward to bring cannabis-based medicines through the FDA continues on. If you look up today, marijuana-based medicines, whatever out that the FDA has had oversight on them, there's probably at least 8 or 9, maybe 10 products right now. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of that. And I think if you take a look at the research being done, again, internationally, as well as within the U.S., that is moving forward. So, there's a group, an advocacy group in the medical marijuana space. It's called Patients Out of Time. And I understand that. I think your child is ill, your child has Dravet's disease, uncontrollable seizures, you do what you need to do. And that's really why, we used to have what we called marijuana refugees in Colorado. Because the availability of cannabidiol in particular as an extract of cannabis and the ability to control uncontrolled seizures that were managed in traditional medicine offered great promise, and enough promise that I think before Christmas we're going to have the approval of the first FDA approved, good manufacturing, GMP manufactured cannabidiol, and that will be GW Pharma's products, Epidiolex. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because that opens all kinds of doors, as well as perhaps shutting some doors for people that have been in what I'll call the Wild West of the medical marijuana space.
Before we go any further, let's take a quick break to thank one of our sponsors and hear from them in messaging, and then we'll be right back.
KeyCentrix has been leading and guiding the pharmacy industry for over 40 years. A forerunner of innovation and technology, KeyCentrix more than delivers pharmacy software solutions to the ever-expanding complex network of healthcare. The heart of KeyCentrix is dedicated to restoring patient health and promoting patient compliance by the continuation of care through pharmacy management. KeyCentrix brings pharmacy management to a comprehensive level of understanding and precision, unlike anything available in the industry. KeyCentrix new LeafRx pharmacy management software revolutionizes this opportunity for specialty pharmacy markets. New LeafRx thinks like a pharmacist and a prescriber at the same time, while also providing the data needed for decisions from every other contributor in the healthcare ecosystem. New LeafRx will lead to successful outcome-based processes, guaranteed. At the end of the day, KeyCentrix software packages have what every pharmacy has been looking for. New LeafRx is the next level of pharmacy management systems. For more information and to experience a demo, visit KeyCentrix.com.
Hey, we're back with Jim Smeeding and Elie Khalife on the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast with a subject that is so interesting to me, and that is medical marijuana in the specialty pharmacy industry. And Jim, you've been really giving some interesting and updated information. I'm part of a team for a company called New Season, who's headquartered out of Maitland, Florida, who is a medication-assisted treatment provider, 70 centers throughout the country, serving 33,000 patient lives in 22 states, concentrating on opioid addiction. And there are studies out there, Jim, that I'd like to hear from you on that are leveraging medical marijuana in the world of the opioid crisis. So whatever information you can share with us about that is going to be quite interesting, definitely to me and our listeners.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about that. First of all, I think everybody should know, but if not, it's easy to find online, what have you, that the Veterans Administration, our own federally funded healthcare system for vets, started looking at opioid use and opioid addiction. And I don't think it's a huge surprise to find out that the opportunities to utilize medical marijuana for pain management are much, much underplayed and are very much so critical in terms of some of the things that we could do to control the opioid addiction problem. I think that if, for example, state by state, I think people should know this, but if you have medical marijuana approved in your state, obviously, and it is state by state, so it's all over the board, but at least in Colorado, where they offer actually research support in this particular space, as well as survey patients that have received medical marijuana approval, that you'll find out that 90% of them claim to be using medical marijuana for pain management. My goodness, that's pretty overwhelming, and it could be in multiple disease conditions. But I think it's a well-known fact that marijuana is a potent analgesic agent, and that it decreases the addictive response that people develop in regards to the use of opioids, as well as, quite honestly, nicotine. So, again, I think it's understood, realized, but now to get state legislatures to also then put into their indications, of which most medical marijuana regulation on a state-by-state level has various indications for various diseases, that opioid addiction, which we know and consider a disease, ought to be one of the indications for the utilization of medical marijuana. That does a few things, by the way. It decreases the cost to a patient, utilize marijuana as an alternative, because in all states where medical marijuana is approved, once you're approved for medical marijuana use, it's very different from recreational in terms of the cost of the medications as well as the decreased taxes associated. So again, I think the awareness of medical marijuana as a alternative to opioids is a critical undertaking, publication, and something that we ought to have more good press on. And I think when you get people like the New York Times and Huffington Post and others coming out in favor of the legalization of medical marijuana in general, I think that part of that falls upon the public popular press as well, to make sure that people understand that this is a much better alternative than opioids.
So, Jim, consuming... There will be multiple ways in consuming the medical marijuana. And we're not talking about just the ingestibles in terms of, the cookies or brownies, but also the molecules that could go in everyday's medicine. The effects of marijuana, the effects of cannabinoids with the mix of other drugs. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to, actually. So again, I think we all know that cannabidiol represents the non-psychoactive major componentry within the full spectrum marijuana. It's the Charlotte strain, all the popularity of decreased THC, meaning that basically strong cannabidiol product is not going to get you high, but is going to give you a whole lot of benefits associated with the particular receptor sites that are intervened or interacted at by cannabidiol. So it's a terrific extract of the full spectrum plant. At the same time, I think that, again, these extracts and design of cannabis-based medicines continues to evolve very clearly as a science. So I know a little earlier we talked about some organizations. I think the ICRS, International Cannabinoid Research Society, is an area where the original receptor sites that are interacted on by the endocannabinoid receptor system, all that research took place. And what we continue to look at is figuring out where these sites are, what the receptor is, and what the componentry is that interacts out of cannabis. Now, there's some interesting opportunities moving forward. So we have to make a couple of, pharmacy-related areas of interest here. So let me talk a little bit about that, Elie, and then I'll dial right back in on the dosage form opportunities, etc. So again, I mentioned that pharmacists obviously in very few areas can really participate. Joe Friedman is a bit of an exception. He's working for a dispensary, not a pharmacy, in Illinois as a pharmacist. Connecticut, a little bit different. In Connecticut, you had to have a pharmacist to be a licensed dispensary. So some variations there in terms of what those opportunities are. And I will say it was very interesting to me when the state of Illinois was considering the medicalization, or I should say the approval of medical marijuana. The State Board of Pharmacy did not want to be involved. And this, I think, is as we see, and I think everything shows in terms of education for pharmacists, education for physicians, that the medical profession does want to be involved. I traveled to Illinois, met with the State Board of Pharmacy in a public meeting, and it was very fascinating to me to find out that while it was portrayed that pharmacists didn't want to be involved, the audience that was at that state board meeting, as well as the majority of the Board of Pharmacy participants, said we definitely want to be involved. In fact, we don't know why, because of a design and agency structure within Illinois, that we're not being allowed to be involved. So again, I think there's a huge desire to be involved. So let's talk a little bit about the question at hand in terms of extracts, design, what have you. So again, Cannabidiol is, THC, can be extracted from the full spectrum plant. It can be purified, and even today, unfortunately, it's still listed as a C1 medication. But now that it's going through FDA approval, I think we're going to see a lot more opportunity as well as research in it. So, the goal of cannabis-based medicines is to produce products that can be written for by physicians, dispensed by pharmacists, and actually reimbursed by insurers. So Epidiolex is coming to market. I think we're going to see a big howl and a scream from some people, but the prediction is it's going to cost $2,500 to $5,000 a month, which kind of puts it into the specialty space in my mind. And the indications are going to be fairly narrow, but as we know with all medications, off-label use is going to occur. So a little bit about cannabidiol in terms of its physical properties. First of all, you have to understand it's very poorly absorbed. So for every 5 milligrams of cannabidiol that is taken orally, only 1 milligram will effectively ever reach the receptor sites because it's metabolized in the liver. And we all know the first pass effect through the gut into the liver will really eliminate, in terms of metabolic levels, the majority of cannabidiol. So we have to be a little smarter about what the opportunities are with cannabidiol. So, and I think we're going to see that the reason that it was in clinical trials by GW Pharma, the people who are bringing Epidiolex into the U.S. market, is about 55% successful, and mostly had to do with GI distress and other things that patients were able to tolerate. So the development of patches, the development of the use of subcutaneous system, the use of sublingual form of delivery offers a lot of promise. And again, that's kind of, the center of where pharmacy and pharmacists can be involved is in some of these dosage forms, as well as I think we know that even though it's very low dose and therefore not very effective, that cannabidiol is being used in salves and creams and other areas where, quite honestly, if it was a little more available and was used in much higher dosages, it would probably see even greater effectiveness. But that may move it again out of what I'll call the medical marijuana space into the cannabis-based medicine space, which I think, again, on a long-term acceptable basis throughout the American public is the way to go forward. And again, this doesn't distract at all from the use of medical marijuana in my idea. It's actually bringing more scientific evidence to bear that there are positive benefits in the medical marijuana space. And if we could extract and test specific agents, that we might find even greater and more appropriate use based on the receptors that interact with those particular drugs. So I know that's a long answer, but at least in my mind, the ability to move forward with the scientific aspects are going to be terrific for medical, pharmacy, nursing practitioners, and others that are in the organized medicine space.
Jim, this is fascinating. We have this as part one of a two-part program, which we're going to welcome you and Elie back to discuss the pharmacist role, indication bioefforts, research. I have questions about big data and medical marijuana. So when we return with Jim Smeeding with indication and Elie Khalife, CEO of KeyCentrix, we're going to have part two of this. And I just want to say thank you so much, Jim, for being on the Specialty Pharmacy podcast today. And Elie and KeyCentrix, thank you so much for sponsoring this wonderful topic.
Thanks for listening to the Specialty Pharmacy Podcast. Be sure to share this podcast with your fellow pharmacists, doctors, and healthcare providers dedicated to optimal patient care. If you have ideas for future episode topics, please email the Pharmacy Podcast Network. Send your message to publisher@pharmacypodcast.com.